In the early years of World War II, few figures carried as much arrogance and confidence as Hermann Göring, the commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe. He had been at the peak of his power when the war began, boasting that no enemy bomb would ever strike German soil as long as his air force existed. To his supporters, he seemed untouchable. To his enemies, he seemed dangerously overconfident. And when word reached him that the United States claimed it would build 50,000 aircraft, Goring didn't just dismiss the idea, he openly laughed. At the time, his reaction made sense to many in Europe. By 1940, America was still working its way out of the Great Depression. Its factories were not yet operating at wartime capacity, and its military was far smaller than the great armies of Europe. Germany had been preparing for war for years, pouring enormous resources into its aircraft, its pilots, and its industrial infrastructure. The Luftwaffe was the most advanced air force in the world, powered by years of strategic planning and massive investment. To Goring, the idea that a nation across the Atlantic, one he believed was industrially soft and militarily inexperienced, could produce 50,000 planes seemed absurd. But what Goring didn't understand, or perhaps what he refused to believe, was the scale of America's industrial potential. The United States had vast natural resources, enormous land, and a manufacturing system that, once fully activated, had the ability to produce at levels no other nation on Earth could match. In pre-war years, this power was dormant. But once awakened, it would become the engine that crushed the Axis powers from the inside out. The story of how America set out to build 50,000 planes and instead built 100,000 begins long before the war. In the early 1930s, President Franklin Roosevelt understood something that many world leaders failed to grasp: that future wars would be fought not only with soldiers, but with machines, specifically aircraft. Air power, he believed, would decide the next war. And although the United States was not yet ready for such a conflict, Roosevelt pushed for expansion, funding, and development of military aviation. His vision laid the foundation for what would become one of the most remarkable industrial transformations in history. By 1940, with Europe in flames, Roosevelt called on America to produce 50,000 aircraft per year: fighters, bombers, transports, trainers, and everything in between. It was an unbelievable number at the time, greater than the total planes produced by many nations in the previous decade combined. But Roosevelt wasn't guessing randomly. He knew that American industry had the unused capacity, the skilled labor, and the innovative spirit required to meet such a goal. When Goering heard Roosevelt's announcement, he scoffed. He had seen America's aircraft industry during the interwar years, and to him it appeared small and weak. What he could not see was the scale of the American automotive industry, the shipyards, the steel mills, the assembly lines, and the millions of workers who, once the challenge was given, would rise to meet it. Germany had a powerful war machine, but it was limited by geography, resources, and manpower. The United States had none of those limitations. Within months of Roosevelt's declaration, America's industrial giants joined the fight. Ford Motor Company, famous for the automobile assembly line, transformed its factories to produce aircraft components. General Motors shifted its full manufacturing infrastructure to wartime output. Boeing, Douglas, Grumman, Lockheed, and North American Aviation expanded production on a scale the world had never seen. Factories ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, powered by millions of American workers, men and women who were trained in record time. The crown jewel of this industrial effort was the Willow Run plant in Michigan. Built by Ford, it was designed to mass-produce B-24 Liberator bombers, the same way cars were made. At its peak, Willow Run produced one bomber every hour, a pace that stunned observers from around the world. Nothing like it had ever been attempted, and yet America made it work. While Germany struggled to replace losses, America was producing aircraft faster than they could be destroyed. Every bomber lost in combat was replaced by another rolling off an assembly line thousands of miles away. Every fighter shot down was quickly followed by a newer, better model. Training units grew rapidly. Pilots were equipped faster, supplied better, and supported by logistics systems Germany could never hope to match. By 1942, the laughter had stopped. Goring could only watch as the skies over Europe began to fill with American aircraft. At first, it was hundreds, then thousands, eventually tens of thousands. The Luftwaffe, once feared across the continent, now faced a relentless wave of enemy planes that seemed endless. No matter how many Germany destroyed, more arrived. The American air fleets became so massive that missions over Europe involved armadas of aircraft stretching for miles across the sky. The strategic bombing campaign against Germany intensified rapidly. American B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators carried out daylight raids, while British bombers attacked at night. Fighters such as the P-47 Thunderbolt and P-51 Mustang provided long-range escort, ensuring that bombers reached their targets with increasing success. The Luftwaffe was forced into a war of attrition it could not win. Goring, who once boasted confidently about his air force, soon found himself admitting the truth. He famously said that when he saw American fighters escorting bombers all the way to Berlin, he knew the war was lost. But the deeper reason behind that loss was not simply the planes themselves. It was the industrial might that built them, sustained them, and replaced them faster than Germany could shoot them down. America didn't simply meet the goal of producing 50,000 aircraft. By the end of the war, it produced more than 100,000 military planes, twice the number that Goring mocked as impossible. Fighters, bombers, transport aircraft, reconnaissance planes, naval aircraft, every category was filled with staggering quantities. This wasn't just manufacturing excellence, it was industrial warfare on a scale never before seen. At home, American factories produced the machines. Abroad, American air crews used them to dominate the skies. Together, they formed a partnership that broke the Luftwaffe, crippled German industry, and ultimately helped defeat Nazi Germany. As 1943 progressed, the United States was no longer merely catching up to its enemies. It was surpassing every expectation, including its own. Hermann Göring, who once dismissed America's dream of producing 50,000 aircraft a year, now found himself receiving reports that bordered on the unbelievable. American factories were no longer producing planes. They were producing them like storms, like mechanical tides rolling off endless assembly lines. And the Luftwaffe, already strained, could do nothing but brace for what was coming. By mid-war, Germany's airfields were being pounded day after day by waves of American bombers, B-17, B-24, and eventually the formidable B-29. But few knew the real story behind this aerial dominance. The United States had reorganized its entire national identity around industrial warfare. For the first time in history, an entire continent-sized nation was behaving like one giant weapons factory. New workers were trained in mere weeks. Women replaced nearly every male-dominated job. High schools held manufacturing classes. Colleges contributed scientific breakthroughs. Retired engineers returned to work. Even Hollywood produced wartime training films. And in the midst of this national transformation, the aircraft industry became the crown jewel. American assembly lines kept stretching, expanding, and accelerating. Factories that were originally designed to produce dozens of planes a month were now producing dozens a day. The Highland Park and Willow Run plants became symbols of a new kind of warfare, a war fought not only with soldiers, but with workers, riveters, and engineers. Goring's intelligence officers reported numbers that sounded impossible. The United States had not only reached the 50,000 plane target, it had blown past it. The goal that Goring ridiculed was now an outdated benchmark, overshadowed by a new and far more intimidating reality. America produced 70,000 aircraft, then 80,000, then finally crossed the unimaginable threshold, over 100,000 aircraft in a single year. For Göring, this was more than a strategic problem. It was a personal humiliation. He had sworn publicly, before cheering crowds, that such American claims were fantasy. He had mocked the idea that a capitalist nation could outbuild a militarized empire. Yet here he was, watching the Luftwaffe, his Luftwaffe, lose strength not because of German weakness, but because of American abundance. Every American plane shot down was replaced quickly. Every bomber lost was rebuilt in days. Every pilot trained returned with dozens more behind him. And as German cities burned, Göring understood the truth he never wanted to admit. Germany could not outfight America, because Germany could not outbuild America. The scale of American production changed the entire course of the air war. Escort fighters, like the P-51 Mustang, began pushing deeper into German skies, dominating Luftwaffe interceptors with superior numbers and longer range. Bombers flew more confidently, knowing replacements were always ready. The skies over Europe, once contested, became American territory. And in the background of this shifting air power, Göring's once feared reputation continued to crumble. His speeches grew quieter, his confidence faded, and even his own officers began to whisper doubts. They knew the war was turning, and they knew the reason. America had become the world's factory, and Germany stood no chance against it. As the war dragged into 1944, the Luftwaffe could barely function. Fuel shortages crippled training programs. Experienced pilots were killed faster than they could be replaced. German factories, bombed relentlessly, struggled to produce even a fraction of what they had before. Meanwhile, American factories were hitting peak efficiency, turning out bombers, fighters, cargo planes, engines, replacement parts, and ammunition in quantities that defied imagination. By 1945, American air power was not just overwhelming, it was absolute. The skies belonged to the United States, and Göring, once the self-proclaimed master of the air, could only watch the collapse. When he reflected on his earlier laughter, his mockery of America's 50,000 plane dream, it haunted him. Because the United States had not simply matched the challenge, it had doubled it, crushed it, and redefined the meaning of industrial warfare. The final insult came at Nuremberg. When questioned about the loss of air superiority, Göring admitted something he had never dared say aloud during the war. We could produce planes, but not like America. Their factories were without limit. It was the closest he ever came to acknowledging defeat, and he was right. America's industrial might ensured victory long before the final battles were fought. The United States didn't just outfight Germany, it outbuilt it on a scale the world had never seen. And it all began with a moment of laughter, a mockery that history would turn into one of the great ironies of the Second World War. Hermann Göring had laughed at the idea of 50,000 planes. But America built 100,000, and in doing so, sealed the fate of the Luftwaffe, the Reich, and the war itself.